When Al McDowell memory program, so let's see. Recently, when Ozzie was running for Congress for 2 days to take Kathy McMorris's spot, and then Kathy changed her mind, or Trump changed his mind or something. And so he stated to me down here at council, when he's doing his pitch, he said, "It's important we do not become slaves and we talk about things around the table with our families." And so tonight I brought the days before Otto Zehm detainment, and it's important that we look at this and we think about what goes on. So recently a security officer, formerly in the military, was running an underground railroad through disclaimer directions to release individuals from Deaconess. He stated conditions are like Guantanamo Bay. And so that's where I came up with the disclaimer that I talked about a few months ago. And people are continually coming up and talking about the human rights conditions. Now, the beginning part is where Tim Burns used to intervene. So when an individual is mentally detained for mental health in Sacred Heart Hospital, and this is days before Otto Zehm, this is what I'm seeing. There's no written evaluation, no directions, no rules provided, no pens or pencils to write, no medical record transfers. There's discrediting non-reporting of incident account. There's discrediting non-reporting of all life accomplishments. And there's discrediting non-reporting of current work, living conditions, and financials, so there's no financial declaration. They can misreport anything. And there's false observation reporting by doctors and medical staff, false reporting to family members by medical staff supporting medical fraud, which is a form of conditioning and cognitive bias. There's false refusal to supply long-distance phone calls to validate current work activities, degrading crayon, marker, coloring sheet activities, treating me like a child, and continued heckling, mocking, bullying, false reporting to meter by staff, and then there's physical assaults and the threat of assault on refusal of dangerous treatments. And I get stories all the time that are similar to this still going on. But at some point, Tim was going in there, and before an individual is chemically induced, Tim would go in and do a report because the facility is not properly reporting. And so he could get in there before they were chemically injected, and usually the person is injected before they go to in front of the commissioner, and then when they're in front of the commissioner, they're totally out of it and can't represent themselves. So there is a point in there where the ombudsman can come in. Now down here, chemically induced iatrogenic mental diseases and illnesses. I talked with a federal judge about this. He explained it. He took on SSI years ago, and he talked about this issue. There's shortness, so after an injection, there's shortness of breath, swollen throat, blocking airways, coughing, choke, complete paralysis of arms and limbs, depending on what chemicals they give you, swollen tongue, tremors, paralysis, blurry vision, speech impairment, slowed cognitive function, short-term memory loss, long-term memory loss, permanent long-term memory loss, short-term comprehension deficit, inability to write, vocal impairments, and you have educational deficit, lost writing and grammar skills, lost mathematical skills, lost spelling skills, and then the individual isn't able to pretty much defend themselves because they're not independent anymore at that point. And so you're chemically inducing similar to dementia-like symptoms in even young people. And a lot of the time, a person needs a representation by the police department on public record to what's going on. And a lot of the times, the police department is at a scene to protect the medical workers like AMR. They don't always take reports. And I'm still talking to officer after officer about that. And that's my view, is that an individual doesn't always get an incident report because the police officer's job, after the commissioner writes a civil detainment, a lot of the time their job is to protect the medical workers to get the individual from the house to the paramedics. And then the individual is strapped down, and those straps can cut off blood circulation. And when an individual is strapped in the hospital or they're not going to be able to answer questions properly because their cognitive function's off. So there are issues I have and I'd like the police department more involved in figuring things out. But and I'm happy that Tim was going in there. And I still get stories all the time from people on the bus who've been detained, tortured, and they tell me the same stories, and I can visualize exactly what they're saying. A little bit different each time, but I know what they're saying is right because of my own, understanding of things.
So you've mentioned 3 locations. You've said Deaconess, you've said Sacred Heart,
Yeah.
and then you said on scene before you're
Also from
strapped
house
down.
to paramedics, AMR to paramedics.
But you also referred to a commissioner. I assume you're talking about a
commissioners or
commissioner
the
doing
court
an
commissioners?
involuntary treatment
Yeah,
hearing?
court commissioners. So when the police department shows up, their job is to get the individual from point A, which is the house, to point B, which is the paramedics vehicle, and to protect the paramedics from any kind of fighting while the individual's being strapped.
And you're saying
And
there's
they
a
don't-
court commissioner who comes there and
No,
holds
the
it?
court commissioner calls it in. So at some point, an individual is civilly detained, right?
Right. That's what a commissioner does, yeah.
So that's what the commissioner's job is.
So how did Tim Burns and
Tim Burns would get in, he would go into the facilities. He went into Sacred Heart sometimes. He wasn't always in there, but there are people being detained all the time. I have not gone into any cases yet, but I do have the right to go in now because the laws have changed and they're public hearings. So the civil commitments are public hearings now, and we all can go in there and watch what's going on at any time to see what's going on.
And
We have that
Tim
ability.
Burns got involved in that because someone had
A few different times, I guess.
talked to him about the police role.
So
in
yeah,
that.
any kind of altercation with the police or family. And there has, in the past, there's been a misuse of the police department by family members throughout the community. And there has been ongoing problems in the past with false reporting or slandering or misinterpretation or cognitive bias, whatever. And people just continually to make what officers say they're called dumb calls. So on every day we have calls that are called dumb calls. That's what a few officers refer to that term as dumb calls, when an individual is trying to detain or call in or report on someone and it wasn't needed, it wasn't necessary. And so we want to make sure that the officer doesn't wrongfully put someone, an officer also has the right to detain an individual too. If they don't understand what the individual is stating and there's a communication problem, they have the right to state that the individual needs to be evaluated too. And so that's where the police department comes in.
So what is your ultimate goal from this commission and or the OPO?
Well, I just want to make sure that, one, an individual has the right to state that they're not a threat to themselves or others, and they're being wrongfully detained by the commissioner. There's wrongful information going in, and that they can use their First Amendment right to talk to the officer. From point A to point B on the paramedic deal. So if you're being detained to the paramedics, I believe an individual should have the right to state, I'm not a threat to myself or others. Give me a few minutes to make a report on public record to the police department.
Yeah, the difficulty is I'm having a hard time seeing what police conduct we can look at there.
What police conduct? The
Because
state,
that's the
the
only thing we
law,
have
the state
jurisdiction
law
over.
states that I guess the officer right now doesn't have to make a report. And so I'm guessing, I haven't gone far enough into it, but of all the police officers I've talked to about this, they state that they're not required to make a report and that their job is to protect the paramedics.
So one of your requests is that police should be writing up a report whenever
If-
they're present at these situations.
Giving an individual a few minutes, just in case an individual is being wrongfully slandered, libeled, or it's a dumb call, or they have a family member or a neighbor or someone who's being malicious. And sometimes you have people who are mentally ill calling in reports on other individuals, and the information isn't always true. And so the officer doesn't know that. And so an individual needs the right to explain the individual needs the right to explain things to the department, I think.
So it seems to me
There's many different
that a
parts.
way to help you through this might be for us to schedule a meeting with you and Mr. Logue and I to sort out what in here is something that the OPO might actually have a role in. Does that make sense? Because it's hard to find. Yeah.
Well, I'm just curious if there's already been a court commissioner that has made a determination, or a court has made a determination that this person is to be moved, to use your words, from point A to point B. I'm not sure that there's a legal point there where this commission, this is just me, where this commission can say, this is what the police department should be doing, because that would seem to me that that would be something that would be between the court and SBD.
Well, I'm hearing Alan say that before the commissioner makes a ruling.
That's when Tim would go into.
Oh, prior.
So that's a different, so there are different.
Okay, I was
different parts
confused.
to
I thought he was
the
talking
incident.
about after.
That's where Tim would go in this section, and he would, if he was called, he'd go into the hospital at many different times, a day and night, and the individual would say, something's wrong here. Bad calls are being made to the department, and the commissioner is getting bad information, and I need someone to, make a report to prevent from being chemically induced and then not having any rights at all.
So most of what you're talking about is actually way outside our jurisdiction. It has to do with like a medical bill of rights for patients. And there are other entities that would need to help you with that.
Do you think Tim was crossing the line then?
Well, so the only piece that I see that could potentially be something that might be within the jurisdiction of the OPO, OPOC would be if there is a police procedure or policy that could be implemented, modified, or deleted that would facilitate that.
Yeah.
So that's why I said maybe like this is not the sort of discussion that we can really get into here, but it might be good to just have Mr. Logan, you and I, see if there's a piece there or if we need to find you a better.
One point of oversight is when an officer misinterprets the information they're being provided and they wrongfully assume by cognitive bias that the individual is stating untrue information and might be delusional. And then the individual needs to be able to should have the ability to write things out to explain what they said to that officer, so that police incident report isn't misleading the commissioner to make those decisions.
And that might be a procedure to look at.
But that's something that's, if someone makes a complaint about how this is done, we would certainly take that, we would
Right.
put it through internal affairs and we would get that looked at. What we wouldn't do though, because I'm a little bit confused too, we wouldn't intervene during a police response, ever.
Ever.
That's far outside of what I'm allowed to do.
Yeah.
So I would intervene, not really intervene, that's the wrong word.
Yeah.
I would,
Review.
review it after the fact, but only if there was a complaint received.
Yeah.
So if there was a complaint received by Tim Burns and he went to the hospital after the fact, that very well could have happened. But I have zero records of any ombudsman response to a hospital during a situation. It just seems like that. I need far more information, and I'd
Right.
love to sit down and talk to you.
He told me that he did this, but I don't have any evidence.
Well, and it might be that he perceived himself to be doing something other than what you're wanting someone to do. So.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay, so item 5 on our agenda